First of all, thanks for joining us. This is our monthly deep dive into the world of marketing for those that are new to Pimento Marketing Spice. I'm Stephen Knight. I'm the CEO and founder of Pimento. We're an independent agency with a network of 175 agencies that offer marketing services in 97 different marketing disciplines for ambitious brands both here in the UK and internationally. Today, we're, as I say, going to be recording the session. And we're focusing on the world of sport. And obviously, it's going to be a hell of a year for sport. We've got the Olympics in France, Paralympics, the Solheim Cup, the Euros, and much, much more to look forward to. And of course, we had the Six Nations, which kicked off last weekend. But today is really about the future of sport and the future of sports sponsorship. And marketing obviously is evolving at a rapid pace at the moment. We're all witnessing how things are changing, how both AI and digital is impacting on all forms of marketing. And obviously sport is one of those areas. Certainly, if you look at the content, you look at social, you look at influencer, that's really helped to transform the way sponsors look at sport in the last few years. And the structure and the purpose of brand partnerships and sponsorship in sport has shifted enormously as brands search for the very best practices, creating mutually beneficial partnerships between sports entities and, of course, brands. So we've gathered three leaders in the forefront of sports and sponsorship together today to tackle this huge topic. I'd like to welcome Sally Hancock, who is Managing Director of High Tide Leap. Sally is a leader in award-winning brand and sports partnerships with diversity at the heart of what she does. She drives significant brand value and business value for her clients. She's also a non-executive director of the British Paralympic Association, the former chair of Women in Sport, and director of London 2012 for Lloyds Bank, which was voted the most successful sports sponsorship of the last 20 years. Alex Payne is founder of The Influence Room. He's also an experienced television presenter and broadcaster, having spent 20 years with Sky Sports. He now hosts the world's largest rugby podcast, The Good, the Bad and the Rugby, alongside James Haskell and Mike Tyndall. And if you haven't seen that, I would recommend it to you. It's a lot of fun. In 2017, he founded The Influence Room, where brands, charities and people of influence connect with each other over mutual benefiting partnerships. So it's a brand exchange. And finally, Simon Leslie, who is the new owner of Eastbourne Borough Football Club. In his short time at the helm, he's already transferred a player to the Premier League. And prior to football, he built up the world's largest travel media company, Inc., which he sold to Stagwell PLC in 2018. So welcome to all of you, particularly Simon, who's just recovering from pneumonia. Thank you for getting it. Lots to talk about, so I'm going to dive right in if that's okay, and we'll get started. So if our three presenters can make sure that they're off mute, that would be fantastic. So the first question, if I can direct it to you, Alex, there's been a massive shift in digital marketing and media in the last few years. How do you think that's changed the landscape of sports broadcasting and marketing?
As a gentle loosener. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. It's very nice to be with far more sort of influential people in the sports industry than I will ever be, but it's great to be on this panel as well. It's a very interesting question to sort of get us up and running. What has happened in terms of how sport is covered. And depressing, I began at Sky in about 2001, I think it was. And even if you rewind even before that, I think when certainly I was growing up, you had probably 4 television channels to choose from. You had 1 or 2 games in the Six Nations that were covered. You had Match of the Day. You had the old Ashes test on the radio, but there wasn't really the sort of wall-to-wall coverage that we have nowadays. I think, you know, you went from 4 channels to 5, and then along came Sky in the early 90s, and suddenly you went from 5 to a few hundred. And by the time I started in sort of early 2000s, you probably had 900 channels to be choosing from, not all of them sport, obviously, but suddenly the content offering was far broader than certainly it was 20 years before. And if you think about where we sit now in terms of what you can access and where, you can pretty much watch anything from anywhere at any point in history via YouTube and the sort of the infinite number of television channels that we have. And that's before you then go online to social media. So the answer to your question, I think, is that the last 10, 15, 20 years has just seen an absolute explosion in content. And content really is king now in ways that it never has been before. And you see a lot of brands come running to the party at the same time. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning is the content explosion has happened because there are many more channels in which we can publish, but also it's far easier to create content than it ever used to be. When I first started at Sky reporting early 2000s, as I said, it used to take me probably about 4.5, 5 days to create a 2.5 minute VT or piece of footage. We had a magazine show back then called The Rugby Club, and I would have 2 cameramen who'd travel with me for a day. I'd have a sound man, I'd have an editor, I'd have someone who'd mix the footage on a tape. You'd then take it to a sort of warehouse where it was plugged into machines and teed up and barcode and all sorts. I mean, more people than you can imagine to create 2.5 minutes of a fairly average television, certainly when I was ever doing it. But nowadays, you need a kid with a phone and a drone, and they can whip something up in 5 minutes that blows the socks off anything we were doing sort of 20 years ago. So I think what we've seen is that the landscape is infinite now. Anybody, anywhere can create content. Sport tends to have a lot of sort of driving behind it because of the passion that it elicits and it drives. And as that content explosion has happened, so brands have come running along to make sure that they're part of the conversation as well. So the battle for eyeballs is very real, and the brands are certainly sort of playing their part in trying to keep up and trying to be a part of that story.
Yeah, it makes it very difficult, obviously, to measure it now because obviously it's happening in so many platforms, as you rightly say. And Simon, I mean, when you went about and decided you wanted to buy yourself a football club, was that uppermost in your mind? Were you thinking actually digital media here and it's going to influence both the approach and development of sport? How can I harness that?
I think what I thought about was, can I turn this business into a media business, and can I bring the skills that I've learned in media and then attribute it to football? And I think the answer is yes. I think you can do lots of things. And just as Alex was talking there, and I'm thinking, I'm drinking a cup, which is a Coca-Cola cup, which I must have stolen from the stadium last year, because sometimes when these brands do a initiative, they don't realize how long a message goes on, and this is in any form of media. You say, oh, I'm going to buy an advert in the newspaper, and the newspaper lasts one day, therefore the content of that campaign is one day. But the truth is it goes on so much longer, and I think it's the same in any form of media, and sport is even more powerful. People buy shirts, they buy catch keys, they buy things, they have memories, they have pictures that they'll re-look at, and all the messaging that's happening at the time of the event carries on going for years and years and years. And I think sometimes people forget that media is not, or certainly digital media is not just an impression, a bot, or a moment. It's something that goes on for a very long time. And I think the value of the media and the value of the association of sport is completely undervalued by a lot of brands.
Can I quickly ask Simon, you just suddenly reminded me of the old joke, which is how do you make a small fortune? And the answer is to take a big one and buy a football club. Are you bucking that trend, or are you seeing the challenges that so many people have seen in this industry in the past?
As Steve alluded to, I'm 6, so I watch a lot of TV. And yesterday
Right.
I watched the Peter Crouch piece on Dulwich Hamlet. And there was the Peter Crouch joke, which is, what would you have been if you weren't a footballer? And he said he'd be a virgin. And I thought to myself, what would I have been if I didn't own a football club? And the answer would be rich.
There you go.
So yes.
I mean, these passion projects, I mean, behind all of that, Simon, obviously you're a shrewd business person and you've recognized that there is an opportunity here. And, you know, we've seen clubs like Wrexham and others being grabbed by the scruff of the neck and driven forward as essentially as content providers rather than necessarily for their football prowess. Is that something you have in mind now with your recent purchase?
Well, I looked at it slightly more holistically. It's media, it's well-being, and it's rehab. How can I affect a town, a football club, by bringing in the latest equipment in terms of rehabilitation that will obviously help all the footballers and help them go faster, quicker, recover from injury quicker, but also help a town by giving them facilities that are not available to them. So that was where I started the point. And then could I make the football club and the town more famous all over the world? So that's the backbone of my business investment is, can I take I think a good way to explain this is when I told my father I was buying a football club, he pulled what little of his hair out, what little of his hair has left, but he pulled it out. And I said to him, look, but Dad, if I said to you, I'm buying this loss-making business and I'm going to turn it around, you said, go on, son, go for it. I think the minute you add the word football club to the dynamic, everyone has a completely different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, no, that's understandable, isn't it? I guess given previous experiences at other clubs. But if I could bring you in now, Sally, I mean, adding to that, obviously one of the things that has transformed football in recent years has been the development of the women's game. And we've seen some fantastic football. Lionesses performed brilliantly. And, indeed, we saw last year's Spotty Awards. So are you seeing the development of women's sport impacting on the sorts of sports sponsorships that brands are now looking for?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I would actually go a little bit further than, the inclusion of the female version of the game or whatever, but also, as you know, I'm on the board of Paralympics GB, and it's kind of diversity in all of its forms is really what sponsors are after now. And I'm starting to see that increasingly. And it's effective because it plays to the audience, it's good governance, it's contributing to society. And I think it's just, it's a much richer seam of activity and outcomes that we didn't really see in the past. And so women's sport in particular, I think, has just, as we've seen this year, is just, it's just been so in the headlines, and not always for the right reasons either, as we saw during the Women's World Cup. But nonetheless, the sort of uptick in girls wanting to play football, for example, has just gone exponentially through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, picking up on the World Cup there for a second. I mean, obviously the controversy around that whole situation, but actually what it did do, obviously, is heighten and reach a broader audience as a result. Not necessarily for the right reasons, but as they say, all news is good news, in the sense that you are making more people aware of the importance of the game. So interesting. So let's
Can I add something? Sorry, very quickly, and it's just an alternative point of view. I'd be very interested in Sally's view on this, which is that we have a far better sister show with The Good, the Bad, and the Rugby. We've built a show around Emily Scarratt, who won the Rugby World Cup with England in 2014, The Good, the Scaz, and the Rugby. And they are, what's very, very interesting, as Sally says, about the explosion of women's sport, is that obviously the momentum is extraordinary. I actually was lucky enough to cover the Women's Rugby World Cup in England in 2010. And we covered pool matches at Guildford Sports Park, in which, and I'm probably overestimating, there were probably 30 or 40 people watching the games. And next year, the Rugby World Cup will take place in England again, and Twickenham will be sold out, 82,000 for the final. And we've seen it in New Zealand 3 years ago. It's not just football, it's rugby, it's the women's Ashes as well. What's really interesting about that is that as the explosion happens, we keep using that word, the brands are actually activating far better, I think, around women's sport than perhaps the legacy brands are doing in men's sport. So the reason I mentioned The Good, the Scaz, and the Rugby is that they have a very good partnership with Vodafone, and they are running a really good sort of driver of change, which is called Empower Her. And they're out in clubs as the podcast. They are bringing through new talent. They are sponsoring sports scholarships for young British female rugby players. And it's very interesting. It almost feels like the sports landscape is having a bit of a reset on the women's side of things, and is taking a lot of the lessons that have been learnt from the 100 years of whatever it is of sort of men's commercial activity within the sports space, and is going far faster with far greater impact and possibly with far greater sort of legacy as well. I'm just going to chip it in from the sidelines, but I don't know whether you'd say the same thing, Sally, about that.
No, I would completely agree. I mean, it has been an interesting few years, I think, with sponsorships and partnerships. I mean, Stephen and I first met each other way back in 2014 when we had the opportunity to explore and work on the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, out of which one of the major partners we worked for, which was SSE at the time, then wanted to do something groundbreaking out of the back of that, and became the first ever sponsor of women's football in the UK. So it was the SSE Women's FA Cup. We got it into Wembley. We got it on the telly. We got all the kids allowed in for free, and it just kind of went bang. And this was in 2014. And I suppose if I look back on my career at the sort of couple of things that a few things that I've done, but I'm proud that we did that. I think that was quite a sort of a groundbreaking moment. I think since that time, the road has been bumpy, and we've seen all sorts of, issues and challenges, but it's, we are in a far better place than we were. And I think that's recognised as well by the brand partners and the broadcasters and the media.
Alex's point a second ago about the fact that legacy relationships and legacy sponsors are kind of doing the same old stuff, yet new sponsors and new brand partnerships in emerging and developing sports seem to be approaching it from a much more creative and diverse point of view. How do we get the legacy brands to recognise, actually, in the same way as Simon was talking about the depth of his relationship with the football club, how do we get them to think differently and actually recognise the societal contribution they're making and the things that they can be doing beyond, whacking their logo on the side of the team shirt? Anyone on the one?
I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of different new and innovative ways to bring these partnerships to life, I would say. And we need to be really clear on who we're targeting. We need to be really clear on our expectations out of it. We need to ensure that the governing bodies of the sports that we play with are on board and supportive. And it's challenging, but I do see that we've evolved, and we're in a better place than we were.
I think I can answer it quite well, actually, because I've got 3 or 4 major sponsors who I've brought to the club, and rather than just slap the logo on and say thank you very much, take their money and see where we can plug a leak or two, it's been, okay, how can we tell a better story about this? So if I look at Norwegian, for Norwegian to be sponsoring a team in the 6th tier of English football, when they were approached by Bayern Munich and Manchester United, and the marketing manager said, "I've chosen you." And I went, "Oh, that's quite nice. Why?" He said, "Because I think what you're doing is much more real and much more closer to our own guidelines and what we want to do. We want to be giving back to the community. We want to be doing things that the community can benefit from." And I took on board a lot of the stuff they wanted. They wanted really the mental health, and mental health has been all part of my narrative since I took over. I'm very conscious of the poor mental health state, the state of mental health in men's and women's football, by the way, in all levels of football, and look after these players in a way they've never been looked after before. And by the way, some of them don't like that either. They find it uncomfortable having some of these difficult conversations. But go back to Norwegian. So Norwegian gave us some money, and I said, right, allow me to spend it. Allow me to be clever with a little bit of this. And we have a disabled team called Spirit of Football, and we created the most unbelievable content of them getting their first kit, and the imagery and the pictures and the tears, and we told the whole story of they didn't know it was going to happen, how it happened, them putting the kit on for the first time, them walking out with the players. You needed a box of tissues to watch this content. And then I took the players who'd never been on a cruise, some of them hadn't even been out the country, and I took them to Southampton. I said, look, we're going to go and make content on a boat. We're going to show you what a cruise ship looks like. Going way beyond this is, traditional storytelling in advertising, telling the story of what it's like. And then we created what's called the Community Cup for them, which they will do at the end of the season for all the community teams to take part. So they get to see some of their investment really going back to the places they want it to go to. And that is all in line with, I think it's 15 or 16 mental health charities. So people can come and talk to the various charities at the same time about all the different challenges on mental health, and for them to share their knowledge as well.
No, that's brilliant. I mean, and as you say, that's an alignment of values, first of all, the sponsor, so having that shared vision and shared set of values. But equally too, you bring creativity to it, and you're actually talking about doing things in a different way. We've got a first question, if I may, and I'll throw it to the panel. One from our sports master himself, Mr. Morley. A couple of questions. The impact of Netflix, F1, golf, golf, which they've also covered, and now apparently it looks like racquetball is the next big thing. Is that, again, something that's actually really driving both impact and interest in sports? I mean, certainly the F1 analysis would suggest that actually Netflix has brought in the audience to Formula One. We're seeing something, I guess, happening in golf at the moment, and perhaps rackets, or as they call it down in Spain.
Darts. Look at darts. Look how quickly that's.
Yeah, darts. Yeah, and having a
Well, actually-
superhero who people can actually also, I guess, both admire and actually also look up to, is also, I think, an interesting way. We've seen that before, obviously, in the past with people like Tiger Woods and golf, etc. So that tends to change the playing field. Alex, are you looking, in terms of the things that you talk about on the podcast? Whilst 99% of the time you're talking about rugby, what other sports do you tend to want to discuss? I mean, do you is it rugby only, or and everything else is off limits, or do you guys get involved in talking about other things?
Sadly, we're probably about 10% rugby, actually. That's mainly because I can't get the other two to concentrate. But we're much more of a sort of a man cave for people who have a passing interest in the sport, rather than a deep dive into the analytics of what happens every week. In fact, funnily enough, some of our biggest episodes are when you get people on who've got no sort of a strong affiliation. So we did something with Jason Fox from SAS, Who Dares Wins, and just the most extraordinary life story, but something that our audience bought into massively. We've had Eddie Hearn on, and Jamie Dornan, and people who love their rugby and have got strong views, but you wouldn't associate them with being the front runners. Interestingly, we actually had the executive producer week before last on of the new Netflix Six Nations documentary, Full Contact. And I think I may be misquoting this, but I think the F1 share price is up 250% since Drive to Survive began, and you're seeing a similar impact in golf and tennis with Breakpoint, etc. What Netflix did for F1 was to see the sport explode in the US, and that seems to be everybody's holy grail. It still is, the biggest show in town type thing. I mean, racquetball is an interesting one. Darts, I know you mentioned, Simon. The one I'm always fascinated with, and it's predominantly because it's the complete contrast to rugby, which is governed by a million different people going around in circles, all valuing their opinion over everyone else's. The one that really interests me is UFC, which a lot of people will love and a lot of people will loathe, but they are commercially, I think they hope their explosion, keep using that word, surpasses certainly anything else I can think of off the top of my bat. And it's run by one bloke who makes all the decisions. He knows what his audience wants. He's not trying to be all things to all people. He is very, very clear on what UFC is, what it stands for, and what he's going to do for its core audience. And I think rugby, your question was what other sports, do you take an interest in? The answer is every one of them, because rugby has got so many battles at the moment. But one of rugby's biggest challenges, and there are a few, financially it's on its knees, health and safety wise, it's had a very, very rough few years, although the game is improving in that area and improving markedly. But it just can't make decisions fast enough. And in an era where everything is instant, content is online instantaneously, if you can't make the changes to your sport that mean that it kicks on and it thrives rather than just survives, you're going to get surpassed. And there's a very interesting statistic around Ernst & Young produced, which is something like rugby union is the 4th biggest sport in the UK, and it's a generic term. But if you dial down into Gen Z, it's 28th. And so the younger generation just are not engaging with a sport that's traditionally been certainly one of the big top 10. So that in itself is a big challenge. There's a lot for that sport to improve on. But one of the biggest lessons it can learn is that the sports that move fastest go furthest. And at the moment, rugby seems to be wearing concrete boots.
I mean, that I think has been a real barrier to sponsors getting into sport, has been the idea of having to basically deal with either a fragmented sports network, or associations or governing bodies that are frankly just painful to deal with, who have a kind of a committee type approach, where you're served by, quote unquote, and I don't know if I can use this language, but I'm going to use it anyway, when it came to rugby, the old farts. And it's worse in other areas. I mean, tennis, has been again a sport that for years has been really struggled to kind of grow beyond being seen as slightly elitist, and developing the grassroots and developing and seeing players coming through, particularly in the British system, has been really hard. Sally, do you find that because you're dealing with emerging sports opportunities, and you're dealing with organisations that are perhaps quicker to make decisions, or do you still suffer from that?
I think it's still a challenge. The opportunities are there, but it's in often terms, if I'm bringing a sponsor into a sport, in many cases that sport or that organisation just is not, it just is often reluctant to engage on new ideas, doesn't necessarily understand its audience, potentially has an awful lot of legacy sponsors that perhaps are still contractually engaged with that sport, but gave up some time back, and it's challenging, and we see new sectors, we see new categories coming into play, but it hasn't been easy.
Simon, obviously, when you're running your own club, you don't suffer from that currently, although obviously you still have the constraints of the league in which you perform. I don't know what your long-term ambitions are for the club, whether you see yourself one day in the Premier League or within the Football Association. One would hope that obviously you've got that ambition for the club, but are you daunted by the prospect of having to work with the FA and others?
I was going to say no, but the answer is yes. The first thing I did was I took down all the vaping ads that were around the stadium. We have 36 youth teams, and I just thought that it's wrong that the main advertising around the perimeter of the ground was vaping. So I think that we have a duty of care, to have the right sponsors and have the right partners. And just because the vaping had been a partner for a long time, I just felt it was the wrong partner to have. I think for me, I've made this quite vocal last week. I went to the National League CEOs conference, and it's stuck in the dark ages. The National League has an opportunity to do what the EPL has done and what the Premier League has done, and they're not doing it. And it's run by a lot of crusty old men who won't change, who quote rules point 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and unless somebody comes in and starts shaking this up, it will be slow to change. And I think just like rugby and just like quite a few other sports, unless the voices become louder and probably slightly more aggressive, it'll just keep doing the same thing, and they'll keep getting the same results. And it's frustrating and when you're part of it as well, when you're part of the problem. There are 72 teams in the National League, all with unbelievable stories to be told, with crazy chairmen, crazy players, crazy owners, crazy football grounds, some really wacky burgers, and their stories are not getting told at all. And having done a tour of parts of England that I've never seen before, it really is interesting, and there really are some amazing stories. And I would like to, I proposed this last week. I said, they suspended their National League TV on the North and South leagues because it doesn't make any money. But the program is not very good. The system that they use is not very good, and they're still expecting people to pay £10 to use it, and then they wonder why nobody takes it up. And I think that is part of the problem, is it's ill thought out, ill considered, and run by people who don't understand what they're doing. And in order to do things, and I imagine rugby's got the same part of the same problem, is that it's still being run by the same people who used to have 48 pints of Guinness during the day, and that can't happen anymore. You need a different person at the helm, in the marketing, in the commercial departments, and then things will change quite quickly.
I mean, Sally, when you were chair of the Women in Sport, and obviously now your executive director position, you will have seen, I hope, significant shifts and changes in the last 10 to 12 years, but there's still clearly a lot more to be done.
In women's sport, are we specifically?
Well, in general, you're coming up against the same sort of mentality we're just talking about.
Oh yeah, I mean, things definitely have improved, and as I say, when I first became the chair of Women in Sport, I mean, we were way behind the men's sport, And we've had to fight hard for that, and we've had to fight our own battles. So I'm really pleased to see that things have improved over time, but it's been tough.
And
It doesn't need to,
sorry,
it doesn't need to take so long. You know,
No.
some people made some decisions, things would change quite quickly.
so a few questions coming in from the guests today. One from Mark Joy. Sustainability seems to be becoming a logjam right across sport, with brands becoming increasingly risk averse, but most rights holders moving slowly. Do you feel that the major governing bodies are engaging properly or hiding under the desk?
I think
Anyone?
that's a really interesting question, actually. You know, because the sort of attention at the moment now on sustainability, traveling to games, you know, traveling to matches. The next two Olympics after Paris are in Los Angeles and Brisbane. You know, we have, you know, from my perspective, for example, with the Paralympics GB hat on, is getting an enormous number of people to compete in another part of the world, and all of the, you know, and all of the sustainability challenges that come with that. You know, I don't know where we'll be in 5 to 10 years' time, but there clearly are, you know, it clearly is becoming increasingly a topic that we have to consider within sport, and think very carefully about, I would say.
The reverse of that, where people from New Zealand don't have to travel so far, though.
Right.
7 of them. I think, I mean, the only sort of anecdote I'd throw in there is I completely get the travel challenges, and I don't know how you solve those. I'm not sure you can, but I do think, and Simon, you might have some very good examples of this. I do think, for example, match day experiences have become far more, and clubs have become far more conscious about the role they're playing. There used to be a great anecdote, which is that if you stacked all of the plastic pint glasses that Twickenham consumed in a year, it would stretch from London to Bristol and halfway back again. And now they have these reusable pint pots that you buy your beer, but you get £2 back at the end of the day if you've used it over and over again. It's a small anecdote, but I do think clubs and competitions and governing bodies are conscious of what they can do in their own garden. You're always going to have those challenges around major sporting events on the other side of the world, and what you do about that. But perhaps, you know, like all these things, perhaps the easy stuff begins at home.
Yeah, I think, you know, the beer example is a good one, because it obviously it says about a lot about the attitude, as well as obviously, you know, it's making a contribution, albeit it's one of a few things that they could be doing. Rebecca Dana, question from you. What are your thoughts on the brand as big as Nike initially deciding not to sell the Mary Harper kit at the start of the World Cup? A bit of an own goal, that one. Just anyone.
Utter insanity in 2023 to make an oversight like that. And forgive me if I've got this wrong, I think they then doubled down and said, no, we're still not going to do it, until everyone said, yes, you will. And then they did, and it sold out overnight. So I cannot get my head around that.
A lovely note here for you, and you may know this gentleman. I'm not sure, but we live in Eastbourne and ended up buying 3 season tickets after seeing the marketing online. Simon mentioned it's very exciting to see how Simon has transformed and energized the club. Huge positive changes there on and off the pitch in a very short space of time. And again, that talks to, you know, the need to move quickly. And I think, you know, the podcast is an example, because both Sally and you are both, you know, sort of building an audience in your podcasts and activity. The great thing about that is that you've made a conscious decision to act and do something that's different outside of traditional ways of building an audience and communicating with a fan base. And that leads to change. That leads to people basically being engaged. It gets them more interested in the sport, allows them to vent their frustrations as well as their excitement. And hopefully the governing bodies begin to see that's beginning to actually impact on change in each of the individual sports that you represent. I want to move on, if I may, and talk about another key aspect, and that is really, you know, if you're new to sponsorship brand, how do you start? You know, there's a myriad of different opportunities out there. Obviously, it will depend upon your business or brand objectives, but how do you start about developing a sponsorship or a partnership strategy? Sally, can I start with you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, where do you begin? Well, you begin with your business, clearly. You begin with your aspirations and intent as a business. You start with by really scrutinizing and understanding your target audience, not only the audience, the consumers that you have, but the audience that you want, I would say. You be very clear on the commitment you're prepared to make. You do your due diligence around the multitude of rights holders that you could potentially partner with. And you should scrutinize that very carefully. You should be really clear that you have the full support of your management team and board, and that you're committed and you're there for the long run, and you're going to go through the rough and the smooth and the good and the bad times. But from my experience, if done well, sponsorship can substantially augment the marketing of any brand. But it has to be very precise. It has to be understood, has to be managed well, and it has to be relevant. I can't necessarily cite an example, but there are a few where you think, really, you've partnered with this? I mean, why? What is it bringing to the target audience? What are you adding to the value of this particular competition, sport, or event? That's my rant.
No, that's good insight. Thank you very much indeed. And Alex too. I mean, if you could handle that question.
The example I would give you, my daughter's obsessed with netball. She's 14 and does it 4 nights a week. And I took her the other day to the Copper Box. And I've been very lucky to be at some great big sporting events. And I would put England against Jamaica in the netball as one of the best experiences that I've been at. It was the perfect stadium of the right size. It was full to the rafters. And what I came away with was that, and I don't necessarily know hugely what I'm looking at, but it was just a brilliant experience. And the days, as you said earlier, of Benson and Hedges slapping their logo on the side of an F1 car and thinking that that was sports sponsorship, we are miles on from there. And Vitality, who I think have been sponsoring netball in this country for 5-10 years, someone could correct me, they've actually become a very big stakeholder in the sport. They are now hugely associated with it, but their backing of it at the start is paying dividends for them now as it has grown with England Netball, but also with a broadcaster in Sky who has thrown their marketing machine behind it. They've given it the airtime. And so I'm quite interested in the business of sport. I think it's a really good case study of when you find the right brand and the right sport and the right broadcaster, and all of them get around the table and say, right, this is where we're going to go. Those are the relationships and the success stories that you'll see. And again, I keep going back to rugby, which has bounced around on 4 different broadcasts. I mean, well, I say bounced around 4 different. You need 15 different television subscriptions to watch all the rugby if you want to. It's got new sponsors every 3 years because no one renews and grows. Guinness have gone and they've come back. Heineken have just walked away from the Champions Cup. You look at the big brands in sport like Nike and Adidas. Very few of them are working in rugby, and that just tells you that it's such a fragmented space where you can't make the change and capture the momentum that you can do in another sport where and own it is a strong statement. But Vitality and England Netball and Sky have built something really sort of symbiotic. It's all working for all 3 parties. Everybody's benefiting. The rising tide is floating all boats. And that's where, and Simon's point, I think, is a really interesting one. When he talks about, brands coming to work with him rather than in the Bundesliga, it's because as a brand now, you can find any story that you want to tap into through whatever sport or whatever individual it is. There is something for everybody. And if you get it right, it can absolutely fly. Welcome to Wrexham as an example of that, and rugby is the contrast. Sorry to be a bit of a naysayer, but that would be my 2p on it.
I mean, Simon, are there sponsors out there that you would love to be talking to? Are there individual brands that you feel an aspiration to be working with because of values or cash even, God forbid?
Can I tell you another example just to show you how
please,
I weaved in brands and work with them? Is that there was a local suit manufacturer in Eastbourne, and they showed some interest in sponsorship. And I said, look, whilst I'd love to take your money and put a board up, that's not what it's about. And the first iteration was we took a load of players, we did a fashion shoot with them, dressed them all up, and they gave them all a suit and tie. And we created the Eastbourne suit, which we now have on sale in our club shop. they took a lot of the images and they gave them some really cool images for them to market. Last Monday, took a different set of players and we went to Plumpton Racecourse and we all dressed up like we were in a set of Peaky Blinders, and we shot. They got amazing. I think they got something like 200 or 300 amazing shots that they could use in their marketing now for free, without having to pay models, without having to pay things, getting real life characters in there. And I think that's much better value for a brand than saying, "Oh, I'll take your money and I'll give you a board." You know, I'm doing stuff that, one, it helps my players, it helps them as a brand, and also we're bringing other brands in who are close to us in Eastbourne and supporting them as well. And now the director of the racecourse said, "Well, I want to help you. I want to do more stuff with you." And I think that's what you've got to do. You've got to set up a deck of cards which brings in lots of different partners, and that way you're supporting each other and you're creating an ecosystem where we're all benefiting from the relationships.
100%.
Lots of questions coming in now, Simon, but one build on that. I mean, give us some idea of your content and digital strategy and the sort of figures that you're now getting as a club.
Are we getting tens of millions of views now every single month? And I probably put overspent on social media, and I got quite a lot of feedback from some of the fans that I was spending too much time focusing on social media. But I want to tell the story. I want to document everything we're doing, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly of our story, because we have on the pitch, we haven't delivered anywhere near what I promised. But off the pitch and around the stadium and working with the players and the brands and supporting them, we're going way beyond what we promised we'd do. And I think that's important. Now, if you do all the right things, the football will figure itself out. We will get there, and I'm not worried about the football. But it's really important to have a really big vision, have a really good team, and tell a really good story. That's what building a business is. Have you got a good team? And the problem that maybe I overestimated my ability to create a good team first time round, and it does take time. And in business, it took me 15, 20 years to get the right team before we went on and took over the world. But I tried to do it from day one, and that was probably a little bit ambitious. But I've got a great team. They're producing great content. They're telling the story. People are finding out about us. We're selling shirts in Singapore. We sold shirts in Thailand, all over the States. This is a non-league team, who last year sold 67 shirts. This year we'll sell over 1,000 shirts. And I think that's just testament to everything that we're doing.
Thank you. Couple of questions here, Mark Joy. We're talking here about you talk about vaping brands and how they've kind of sort of washed their brands across many different sponsorship opportunities in the past, and how we've moved on from cigarette branding. But now, obviously, we're dealing with gambling, energy companies, alcohol, and as someone also just added, crypto. Do those sorts of organisations have a place in modern day sport?
I think
I used to go to the American Airlines Arena, that then became the crypto arena, that became something else arena. And so it's very hard when you run a business that's losing money, and most businesses lose money, to be too righteous. Crypto is, you could say, well, Lloyd's Bank in their prime was spending money, and today crypto is your modern day currency.
Sally, you about to comment on
Yeah,
that?
no, I was just going to support that. I mean, it's really, and the guys know this very well. It's really challenging. You need to bring in sponsors to help to support your club or your event or your what have you. You want to find those ones that are going to add extra value to your proposition, but it's not easy. And I've seen this many times where, particularly probably 12 months ago, when crypto was the thing, and these partnerships were being signed up, and you were thinking, God, is this really robust? Is this right? Is this going to sustain? And of course it didn't. So I just think there has to be some just really good governance around the selection of sponsors and really, really clear contracts of agreement and terms and rights. So there are no wrongs, really.
No wrongs. Alex.
I was just going to very quickly add a separate one, which is the production company who help us do our podcast, also do Simon Jordan's new pod, which some may have seen, they may not. He's quite combative and he gets very good interviews away with big personalities across a range of sports. What's interesting about that is it is sponsored and funded by William Hill. And the reason that I reference that is I think some of these brands now are far more aware of how they need to put themselves out in the market. It's not just blasting odds across social media and at half-time of football matches. It's providing value. And William Hill are hoping, I think, that through association of what is a really, really impressive production, that people will think next time we're going to have a flutter, I will go to William Hill. But I think the days of, you know, James, I keep using Formula One, but James Hunt smoking Marlboro on the front of his F1 car, you've got to be more aware of what value you're providing as you do your sponsorship, rather than just whether you are slapping your logo in the right places.
But I mean, interestingly enough, I mean, there's a lot of agencies on this call today, and very often when they are asked to work for a pitch, they will have a point of view as to whether they want to work with a particular brand. Is that the same when it comes to talking about your players? If they're associated with a brand that they don't feel comfortable for, is there any player influence over sponsorship selection?
Is that for me?
Anyone really? I mean, I think it happens in all sports.
I mean, we've had instances where, you know, players didn't want to do something, some photos shown to answer some questions. No problem. Do whatever you want to do, and you've got to be comfortable with it. And I think it goes back to me as the rights holder. I've got to have a moral compass that I'm comfortable with, and you know, if it passes that, then I'll have the conversation. But if it doesn't, I won't. And some people are going to have a slightly lower bar than I do, and you know, I've come in with a clear vision of what you can do without having to drop the bar.
I just throw in very quickly, I was very, very lucky 23 years ago to do an internship at IMG. And as part of doing the internship, we had breakfast with Mark McCormack, who is sort of widely considered as the godfather of what is now the sports industry. And it began, he was great mates with Arnold Palmer. And Arnold Palmer won a golf tournament and they handed him a bottle of Moe and wanted him to hold it up and take the photo. And McCormack stepped in and said, "Are you paying him?" And the organisation said no. And so he said, "In which case we'll turn the bottle around." So there was no branding on the bottle he was holding. That apparently is where the industry that so many of us now work in and how it all began. But I sort of used that in comparison to Ronaldo at the Football World Cup, who sat in a press conference and knocked the Coke bottles off the table and said, this is not what kids should be drinking. You should drink water. So I think you're absolutely right. I think player power within sort of the brands that they now work with is increasing, and I think it will only become more so. I think what we're all saying is that every organisation, every competition, every club, and probably every player needs a bit of a purpose around them. You've got to be more than just a footballer nowadays. And Rashford, although he's had a bad few weeks, is a really good example of someone who is using his position to drive change. So I think that sort of brand association for players, and whether they're working with brands they're comfortable with, is only going to grow.
One of the first things I initiated, we've only done a couple, but we'll get it done before the end of the season, is a brand book for each player, where they literally work out who they are, what they like, what they support, and sit there and get a journalist to sit and write it with them, so they've got something that they can then show to, you know, brands, works, business, whatever they want to do post sport. They've got something that says, this is who I am, this is my story, this is the brands I've worked with. And obviously, because we're taking lots of pictures and creating lots of images, we're giving them lots of stuff that they can use that'll be useful to them, you know, when whatever they do next or whatever they want to do in association with their football.
I love that idea. I really do. I mean, and that's inherently part of their value proposition and helps enormously in terms of media content and development. So a lot of sense there. A good question here from Alex. I'm going to sort of tweak it slightly, Alex. It'd be great if a sponsor was incentivized as part of their sponsorship to bring value to the grassroots side of a particular club or sport. Great reach and also potentially delivering value where needed. I mean, a little bit like, I guess, a building developer these days. You've got to put 12 houses up. You've got to put 2 or 3 affordable properties up at the same time. Is this something that we can either mandate or bring into the way in which we negotiate contracts?
I'm not sure that you can necessarily mandate it, but from my experience, a good sponsorship does cover from the top to the bottom of that event slash sport slash club. You know, I think if you're only ever sort of positioning yourselves at the sort of that higher echelons of it, you're losing value. You really are leaving value on the table. And I think, you know, a top to bottom contract, top to bottom agreements and rights, not overcomplicated, but really clear, so everybody knows what's what, is the right way to go, in my opinion.
I think a lot of that is happening already. I use the example of Continental Tires, who are a big partner of England Rugby, and they display all over Twickenham, and they are very present on match day. But as part of that activation, they also sponsor the Schools Cup competition. So now is the Continental Tires Schools Cup or whatever it is, and their branding is all over that as well. So I think there's quite a bit of that. Some are obviously doing very well, and others aren't.
No, absolutely. I
Think about it. I mean, I don't even know if JVC still exists, but a lot of people you see wandering around the Emirates in JVC kits, and you think, you know, some of those kits have lasted longer than the brand did.
Yeah.
I worked on JVC years ago on the advertising side. It's very much around. So a kind of last final question, really, and I guess it's to all three of you individually. It's what advice would you offer to someone looking to build a career in sports marketing and media?
I start.
I'll start. So, Simon, you go.
I always say to people when they used to start in work, I said, find out who the best person is in your department and go and spend some time, buy them a coffee and learn from them. And I think the same would apply to this. Whatever you want to do, go and get as close as you can to the people that inspire you. And sometimes you can't get close to them and you can't talk to them, but you could watch a podcast, you can read the book, you could go to their YouTube, you can do a lot of the things to find out what made them famous or made them successful before you ever do get that moment. And at some point, and I realized this quite a few times, that I'd read people's stuff and followed them about, and the next thing is I'm on stage with them or sitting there eating greasy fish and chips with them after the show, and wow. And that all started because I really was inspired by what they were doing, and I got to know them in a way, and eventually I got to interact with them and they had them sitting in the back of my car. So that's the best advice I would give, is if they, you know, write to them, and if they don't respond to you, just find out everything you possibly can and enjoy the stuff that they've done. And if you do that enough, one of these days they could be sat in the back of your car with you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sally.
Well, I would just say, I mean, I've seen this with a few people I've interviewed over the years, is like, don't be blindsided by the idea of the glamour of it. You know, if you think you're going to do this because you're going to meet your favorite football player / team / travel the world, you're probably going to be quite bitterly disappointed. So I think it's not about the sport, it's about business and what sport brings to business, and also what it brings to society and to communities and so forth. So I think I would say just try and stay impartial, be objective, and be, you know, and enjoy the ride, because actually it's a brilliant area of to work in. We are, all of us, very privileged to do this. But at the end of the day, it's got to be successful and it's got to deliver.
Thank you very much indeed. And last but by no means least, Alex.
What would my 2P be? I completely agree with Sally. I think people come into the sports industry because it's a passion play. You don't necessarily come in to make your fortune. I think Simon's come in to lose his. So you've got to be very, very keen on what it is that you do. And I think if you have a genuine passion for the subject that you are working in, then you will go a lot farther. I would never have made it nearly as far as I have done if I'd been covering speedway or tennis. I've been very lucky because I had a genuine passion for the sport of rugby. I started making tea and coffee. A lot of people would say I should probably still be doing that, but you've got to work very, very hard to get your break. And I have been unbelievably lucky in my career, but I've also worked very hard to be in the right place at the right time to be lucky. So never, ever, ever think that you can do too much networking or send too many emails or give up too many weekends to be in the right place at the right time. And the third bit would be, always be very nice to people on the way up, because before you know it, you're on the way back down again. And if you haven't got it right, your fall can come a lot farther and faster. So yeah, I think good people go far, particularly in areas that they are really passionate about.
Yeah.
Can I just add one more point to that, because it suddenly reminded me as you were talking then, you know, when you're struggling, and I have been struggling over the last couple of months with injuries and, you know, challenges, it's amazing how many nice people come out the woodwork to want to help you. And last week I had the pleasure of talking to Rio Ferdinand, and you know, the guy you see on the TV, and sometimes you see these people and you think, oh, they can't be really like that in real life. And I was having a Zoom with him, and I was thinking, he really is like that in real life. He's just, you know, he's a dad with dad challenges and all the other things, and he's trying to make great content, and he's trying to do all these amazing things, and but he's still got 10 minutes to sit and chat about football and with somebody who doesn't really know what he's talking about yet, and give up his time. And that's the thing that I would just stress to people. Busy, successful people understand that you've got to help out people on the way up, and they will give you your time. So never, never, ever be scared to ask for someone's help.
That is brilliant advice from all three of you. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks to everyone for attending today's session. We will have a video. We'll be able to share that with you, and you can in turn share it with your friends. For our agencies on today's call, our next get together is the 6 p.m. Club in London on Thursday, the 22nd of February. It's being hosted by Promo Veritas. If you'd like to attend, you're an agency, or indeed if you have a brand, why not come along? Just all you need to do is just link on the follow the link, which is now in the chat box, or will be shortly. I think we've got capacity for 17. We've got about 58 restaurants at the moment. And then also just to remind all our members on the call that all the upcoming events are all available on the portal. And finally, to our brands, if you found today interesting, if you have more questions about brand sponsorship, brand engagement, or anything to do with brand partnerships, please just drop me an email at the same address. It's stephen.knight@pimento.co.uk, and I can also link you up to any of our panel today. Great panel, really enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us this morning, and hope to be back in the very near future. This has been Pimento Marketing Spice.